Hello and welcome to Let's Talk HR with Dr. Deneen, the talk show about all things HR. We are now 2 years into a global pandemic that has claimed the lives of over 900,000 people in the United States and millions worldwide. There are countless others who are still suffering from the long-term effects of COVID-19. At the present time, mask mandates and social distancing protocols have been relaxed across the country. But according to the Center for Disease Control, the CDC, despite declining national numbers in COVID cases and hospitalizations, Americans should not lose sight of this ongoing public health crisis. So here's the dilemma. If the goal for every employer is to create a safe working environment for its employees, does it make it more difficult for employers to provide safe space when the tools to fight the pandemic are being relaxed? So here's the question. To mask or not to mask in the workplace? That is the question. And the person to help us answer this question is attorney Jeff Weintraub. How are you today, Jeff?
I am good. Thank you for having me, Dr. Deneen.
We are so glad to have you. So I want to talk about you for just a second.
Okay. Lawyers don't usually like to talk about themselves.
But I tell you what, we're going to do it today on Let's Talk HR. So you are an icon in the legal world. Strong influencer in the HR arena. So tell us a little bit about your career journey. How did you become being interested in being an attorney?
Well, my dad was Sam Weintraub. He was a labor attorney. He left the National Labor Relations Board after World War II. He fought in the Pacific during World War II, and he was a hero. But that's for another story for another time.
That's a great.
He came back and served on the National Labor Relations Board, and they sent him to Memphis to open what became the 26th region of the National Labor Relations Board. And that region's now no longer a region, but he started it here. And from watching him and the experience with him, I decided early on that I never wanted to be a lawyer.
Wow, unbelievable.
He worked all the time, but he was a great guy. And at some point, I finally got interested. When I started practicing with the firm, about 80% of what I did was representing employers in traditional labor situations, mostly labor, which we don't really have in Memphis much anymore, but it was mostly labor, helping lawyers avoid compelled, forced unionization. I guess one thing that a lot of people don't know about me is that before I went to law school, I worked on the loading dock at Campbell 66.
Okay.
Now, I know you're surprised that a lawyer once had a real job, but I had a bunch of them.
You had a
I
job.
had a few, and I worked on the loading dock.
Okay.
And I was a member of Teamsters 667.
Wow.
Which is still around.
Yeah.
And I know every time I negotiated with those guys as a lawyer, when they cussed me out, I'd remind them, hey, I'm a brother. And they say, we got to burn that car. But, I always got along with those guys. They're good guys. But then, we also, from the beginning of Title VII, our firm had always been interested in representing employers in employment discrimination cases.
Okay.
And I found a niche that I really liked in defending employers in jury trials in federal and state court in employment discrimination cases. So that's what I ended up doing mostly in the second half of my career, and still doing that. We had a trial this last August in federal court, and I understand that at the time it was, I think, the first civil jury trial for this judge in federal court during the pandemic.
Wow. Okay.
So, we had the plastic shields up and the masks and everything. So I thought it went pretty smoothly. So that was kind of where I got interested in it from.
Wow, great. You have a legacy of lawyers in your family. Yeah.
And my daughter and one of my boys are lawyers.
Okay.
And so we're, what did we used to call that, Betsy and I, a three generation lawyer, of which there are a few in Memphis.
Okay.
At the time, there have been several, but not a whole lot, 3 third-generation lawyers.
Wow. Well, we can certainly say that employment law attorneys are so important to the organization today, and we are so glad to have you here in Memphis. But one of the things that you've done is to help an awful lot of employers in the HR field. So much so that you were awarded last year in December the Lifetime Achievement Award for SHRM, Lifetime Achievement Award. How did that make you feel to get that award?
Shocked.
You were shocked?
I'm totally surprised, and I will tell you that SHRM Memphis does a fabulous job of keeping something secret when they want to.
Yes.
I saw that in some of the past recipients of the award, like Judy Bell, and she was totally shocked.
Yes.
When she got the award a couple of years ago. And it was a surprise to me. I was up for a different award and I didn't get it, which was fine. And then this one came up and I saw my name up there and I looked at my wife and said, what the heck? Actually, I didn't say heck.
Oh, you said the other word.
I said another word, but then when I got it, I was just surprised and just totally honored. I mean, it was really cool.
Well deserved. You have helped us in the Memphis area and employers in the Memphis area get to where they need to be in terms of law. But there's another interesting fact about Attorney Weintraub that no one knows. Let me tell you, let me fill you in. He is also a rock and blues musician. Tell us about it.
Well, now that's true. We had a band coming out of East High School in Memphis in the mid-'60s called the Fabulous Bounders. Perhaps you heard of them?
Nah.
Well,
No.
we once got paid $50 on a job, so I thought maybe you might have heard of us.
No.
We're in one of those old garage band yearbooks, although it's described as the Bounders, the picture, but it wasn't us. It was some buddies of ours. We all happened to be out of town, and these buddies of ours took a picture sitting in our equipment.
Okay.
And so they've gone into posterity. It's the faces. But we got back together 25 years ago, and we practiced and we started playing again. And we have, we generally have played until the pandemic like 3-4 times a year.
Okay.
Primarily festivals.
All right.
In 2016, we opened the Delta Fair main stage, and we were the warm-up group for Steppenwolf.
Okay.
We
How
met
about
those
that?
guys, and Goldie McJohn, their big keyboard player.
Yeah.
When we were breaking down our equipment so they could come on, he came up on stage and said, guys, play one more number.
Okay.
So we played an old Red House Blues, an old Delta Blues classic, and he sat in with us. So we got to jam with Steppenwolf.
Wow, that is outstanding. Well, you never know what you find out here. And Let's Talk HR with Dr. Deneen. Thank you so much for that. And people, now you know, my husband and I, we are going to go and see his band whenever you do.
And I should point out for you in the audience, there will be a tip jar.
Okay. We'll definitely bring extra money in order to do that. But let's get back to mask mandates. So as organizations, as HR professionals, what are the legal obligations do we have to protect employees and the employees in an organization in relation to COVID-19? What are our obligations to do that?
Well, that's a difficult question to answer because in one sense, employers arguably don't have any obligations. In another sense, they have a lot of obligations. But whatever obligations they have in this area, it's very limited. As employers, as HR professionals, you're not the police.
Okay.
You can't force people to wear masks, especially now that the ETS mandate has been dropped. You can require masks in your workplace.
Okay.
But you can't require someone to wear a mask at home at night when he takes his wife and goes to junior's football game.
Okay.
And he's sitting next to thousands, hundreds of unvaccinated people. You can't make him wear a mask at those times. So you can't really protect him in that sense. It's up to the individual. You can do what you can in the workplace and should. But as far as going beyond that and trying to protect people, try and talk someone who doesn't wear a seatbelt in their car into wearing a seatbelt.
Okay.
On personal errands. And personal car. If they don't want to do it, they're not going to work. How long did it take this country to get used to motorcycle riders wearing helmets?
Okay.
Which just seems so logical and much safer. And yet, for many years, maybe I think still a lot of people refuse to wear a helmet. So we have to limit what we're talking about. When we talk about obligations, we can't protect employees. They're going to do what they want to do and what they feel is best for their family when they get home. But we can require things at work. We can require masks at work, or we can require the alternative of mask for testing. We can do any of those things. And just because the ETS was overturned and withdrawn, that had nothing to do with the fact that employers can have their own mandatory vaccination policies.
Oh, wow.
The law when it came into effect before it was overturned, was simply saying that the government could require employers to do that. Okay, so we know that for the time being, that's not going to be the law. But that has nothing to do with the reality that employers can still have their own vaccination mandate policies.
Okay.
Or vaccination in testing in the alternative policies. They can do this.
Okay. So you hear it here. Employers have a choice in whether to do that or not. So what have been some of the workplace guidelines that you've seen that's worked well? We'll talk about both ways in mandating the mask or vaccination. And then on the flip side, an employer that does not want to do that. So what's some of those examples of good guidelines you could put in place?
And this is where things get fuzzy.
Okay.
Because there's so many answers to that question. There's also a third category, and that's the employers who would like to require employees to wear masks, but don't or can't because they're going to lose a large part of their workforce.
Okay.
If they require masks. So employers are in a tough situation, especially those with employers with who have employees that are, we'll say, low-skill employees. And we all know that a lot of people, would prefer to get unemployment rather than work. I'm not saying everybody, because I really think most people want to work. But there are some that are going to prefer not to work when they can get unemployment. So that makes it difficult when you tell an employee who doesn't believe in masks and doesn't want a mask, has maybe strong feelings against it, he's going to have to wear a mask. Well, he's just going to quit. And there are some workforces where they've tried this and 20-30% of the workforce just up and quits.
Wow.
So that makes it difficult. But as far as what you can do, I mean, we have guidelines from the CDC,
Yes.
from OSHA. We have Tennessee guidelines. We have Shelby County guidelines that are still in effect. A lot of people don't know that because they haven't changed in a while. But basically, under the current Shelby County guidelines, if I recall, they say that if you, as an individual, as a citizen, resident of Shelby County, if you go into an employer that has a mandatory mask policy, we all see the signs that are posted. If you come in, you have to wear a mask. Then you're required to wear a mask.
Okay.
Now, I go into restaurants and bars sometimes, and sometimes I'm the only person that's masked. So I think that rule is not, really being followed. But that is, I believe at present, still the rule in Shelby County. And of course, public transportation, you have to wear a mask and so forth.
Okay.
So you have all these different rules. You pick one to follow. To me, the rational, reasonable thing to do to try to find a compromise solution is to, in environments like healthcare where you really need to wear masks, then require it. In other environments, there's other things you can do in addition to mask requirements and alternative testing requirements. You can socially distance employees sometimes. Sometimes you can't. But employers have tried that. You can do temperature testing. I don't know how popular that is at the moment. It was very popular 6 months ago, I suppose. It's probably somewhat less so now. And as you just pointed out, Denise, some of the masking rules are being relaxed around the country. I believe I saw that Walmart 2, 3, 4 days ago announced that they would no longer require their vaccinated employees to wear a mask.
Wow.
The unvaccinated would still be required. And the CDC, I believe 2 or 3 days ago, indicated that they're looking at relaxing the masking requirements. So wait and see.
We'll just have to wait and see. So that is so interesting because let's put it this way. If you have an employee, great employee, perfect performance review scores, right? All of those things. But you're requiring that the employees wear a mask in the workplace, but they have given a complaint with regard to wearing masks. What should that employer do? Should you err on the side of that employee, their freedoms and rights, or do you err on the side of the employer who is mandating it?
I have good friends who's facing these issues, and their children are facing these issues. Some of them have strong beliefs against masks, and I have a personal philosophy of not arguing. I'd rather keep my friends than debate or argue politics or masks or vaccinations. So I won't engage in those conversations with them, but it just tears me up when I see somebody's child that I've known, forever, basically giving up their job because of a philosophical difference about masks or vaccinations. So, I mean, that's painful to see that happen. But it does happen out there, and as an employer, if you're going to have a policy of masking or testing, which is maybe the most logical thing to do for some companies, then it seems to me that's a pretty good answer. Don't you think? To give an employee an alternative to a mask, have your other safety protocols in place with social distancing and so forth, and give the employees the option, if they refuse to wear a mask or object to it, to just get tested. And it's interesting you raise that because a lot of people are unaware that Tennessee has a statute that was passed a couple of months ago. Hit the news because it was somewhat controversial.
All right.
But this new law, which is now in effect, says that an employer cannot take any adverse action like termination against an employee who refuses to provide proof of vaccination.
Wow.
Now, the law does not bar mandatory vaccination. Under the Tennessee law, the employer can still have mandatory vaccination policies. But what the law does do is it says if the employee objects to vaccination, then the employer should not ask the employee for proof that they have been vaccinated.
Wow.
And it can be problematical, but we think it's workable around for most employers. If you ask the employee to, rather than say, you must tell me whether you've been vaccinated, if you ask them to volunteer the information, and that's the key, make it voluntary. If you ask them, are they willing to voluntarily disclose whether they've been vaccinated, whether they have proof of vaccination? And if the employee says yes, okay, good. If the employee says no, obviously take no action against them. But you can, under the law, as we read it, you can deem them to be unvaccinated. And once you've decided, you've accepted that the person is unvaccinated, you can require testing. So that seems like a pretty good way, I'd say around the law, but that seems like a good way to live within the law.
Wow, that is great information. So is it for the employer, in terms of the guidelines that they put in place, is it important for that employer to err on the side of consistency rather than treating employees on a case-by-case basis? And here's what I'm talking about. So if you're consistent, you have your policy, right? You apply that policy to every employee that attends, but do you have the freedom to handle them on case-by-case basis?
Okay, can I get controversial on your program?
You sure can.
All right. People always worry when I say things like that.
I trust you. I trust you, Jeff.
But you seem to be, your fingers seem to be all tight right at the moment, kind of holding. I'm sure that's not stress.
Oh, not at all.
Of course, one of the bywords of HR professionals is that they want to be consistent.
Yes.
Especially when it comes to discipline and termination and so forth. And And much of that is about protected groups. If an employer treats one member of a protected group differently in terms of discipline or termination than someone who's not in that protected group, then the EEOC or the courts or the jury is going to ask, why was that treatment different? Unless the employer has a pretty good reason, then it may be presumed that it's discriminatory on the basis of whatever the protected group is, gender, race, age, disability, etc. However, having said that, I'm going to look in the camera and say HR professionals should never look at the HR world in the light of it's the letter of the law. You just follow the letter. HR is just a checklist. It is not just a checklist. And if you live your life as an HR person just saying, okay, I'm checking this box and therefore I'm going to do this, then you're going to end up in trouble. Because HR is not just about the brain, it's about the heart too.
Absolutely it is.
You've got to have, you can't take the emotion entirely out of the HR world. You can't do that. So let me give an example of that, if I may.
Oh, yes, please.
Let's take the example, it's an example I've used before, of two employees getting in a fight.
All right.
Okay, out in the workplace. You've got a rule against fighting. You say you fight in the workplace, you get fired.
All right.
Okay. So you want to fire these two guys. We'll just take one of these guys. You want to fire this guy, okay? Now, everybody else looks at it that it's a basic rule. Simply look at it, you follow the rule. 2 years ago, the HR professional knows because the HR has access to all the files and manages the files, that there was another fight in the workplace for different protected group employees.
Okay.
And in that case, the employee, we'll just take one of those employees, was only suspended for 2 weeks. So there's one way to look at that and say, okay, here's a guy who is not in the current guy's protected group. And if you're not in this protected group, apparently you only get a 2-week suspension.
Wow.
But if you're in this protected group, you get fired. Okay, that's the way it looks on the outside.
Right.
But then the HR professional doesn't just blindly follow the checklist. The HR professional starts examining the facts and looking at what happened 2 years ago. And what happened 2 years ago, when she checks the files, because supervisors and the witnesses wrote statements, it turns out that the guy 2 years ago didn't start the fight.
Okay.
The other guy started the fight. Now he responded and he hit back. That violated the rule. But in the current situation, the guy that we're talking about started the fight.
Yes.
Now, is there a difference there that the HR professional should take into account? It's not in the rule. There's no difference stated in the rule. But to me, the HR professional should look at both and say, well, yes, there's a qualitative difference there. The first guy didn't start the fight. And he got a 2-week suspension. The current guy, our witnesses say he started the fight. So yes, I'm going to terminate this guy. At the same time, the HR professional has to recognize that, yes, we may get an EEOC charge out of this. Because on the surface, it looks like we're treating people differently. But in reality, the HR professional, to me, has to have some guts and has to do what we sometimes call the right thing. Use a little heart in there and not just follow HR as a checklist. It's so much more than that.
Absolutely, it's so much more than that. Last thing, if there's any advice, the one thing you would tell HR professionals what they should do in handling masks and vaccines, what would your statement be?
I think it would be, don't apply a one-size-fits-all.
Okay.
Look at each situation. In the example of the fight I just gave, look at each situation independently. There may be a request for religious exemption. There may be a disability. And, if there's a disability involved, the employer has the obligation to reasonably accommodate the limitations arising from that disability. And by the way, you don't, in the HR world, accommodate the disability. You accommodate the limitations arising from the disability. If the disability is a back problem, the guy can't lift more than 10 pounds, the limitation is the 10-pound lifting restriction, and that's what you have to accommodate. So you have to consider disability, you have to consider religious, and look at the whole picture before you make a decision. So I would say get away totally from the one size fits all.
Absolutely.
And I guess if I'd say one more thing, I know we're closing out. I'd say one more thing.
Say it.
What I always recommend is nobody should ever do anything in life without consulting their attorney.
Hey, that's the way to do it. You call Jeff, right? Call Jeff, Attorney Jeff Weintraub from Fisher Phillips. This has been outstanding. Thank you so much. What we know from HR professionals is that we are not a checklist, right? We must take into consideration all of the facts and make those decisions based upon the facts and not be a cookie cutter, one size fit all solution. So thank you so much for coming. I'm going to have you back. Are you in agreement?
Yeah, if the money is good like this time, yeah.
If the money is good, well, let's talk. We'll talk about it. Wow, it's been a wonderful time of learning, experiencing, and talking through situations today. We've received valuable information from one of the experts in workplace and employment law. As HR professionals, it's important to stay abreast of issues such as this one so we are able to make the appropriate decisions that impact our workplaces today. Be sure to watch Let's Talk HR with Dr. Deneen every second and fourth Friday on the YouTube channel of the same name. I also encourage you to go to the SHRM Memphis website and register to attend the legal conference. Jeff's going to be there in April. You don't want to miss it. And if you want to get away and learn a little bit more about leadership, you can go to the Tennessee State SHRM website and register for the Strategic Business and Leadership Conference in Nashville, Tennessee coming up. Go to Fisher Phillips website, learn about COVID and what to do. And if you don't know, ask Jeff. I'm Dr. Deneen Lester, and just remember one thing, HR forever. See you next time.